Shit, I think it's still morning. Good morning, I think. Good morning, WTU. It's your founder, Phil Monk. Yeah, I think it's still morning. Oh no, it's actually 12:02. Good afternoon, WTU. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all keeping your spirits high. I have, thanks to the great efforts of Claire Sparey, managed to be a bit more active in the last few days. I have written a post, and I'll also try and talk through it as well. I've actually got my laptop behind as like a prompt screen to try and help me remember what I've written for a change. So first off, I've got to say thank you to Claire Sparey, Marvel's remote desktop technology. Claire has been accessing my computer remotely and being my arms, basically. And I've been sitting here in my bed and just dictating to Claire and instructing her as to what I wanted her to do. And she's been navigating around my computer, and it has been absolutely fantastic. I haven't been able to do anything really at all since lockdown started, apart from calculate how much VAT a typical home grow contributes to the Treasury. Aside from that, I haven't actually been able to do very much, but by chance my daughter's away with her mum for a few days. She's actually back tomorrow now, I think. So in that time I've been making the most of what time I've had. I've rested, obviously, but through the marvels of remote access technology, it's brilliant. I just sit here and we get on the phone and we just talk through the document, and I instruct Claire where to go, and she basically does everything I ask on the computer. And I have to say, it's made it possible to do things. So the first thing I've got to do is a big shout out to Claire and to Paul, because he manages the website for us and he's been helping me keep things up to date. So without my laptop's just timed down. Don't do that. Without the Spareys right now, I wouldn't be doing very much at all, so very much appreciated. So yeah, I've managed, through Claire, managed to update all of the crowd justice page. By that, we had, let me try and remember the numbers, we had 9,041 page visits, we had 307 backers, and they made 415 pledges, I think it was. So I've actually emailed an update to all of those people because I haven't physically been able to do an update since January. Basically, I haven't had the capacity, but it occurred to myself and Claire that we could try through remote desktop access technology, and it's worked. So we will be moving forward in this way. In whatever spare time the two of us have, we'll be connecting and building the documents as possible. So that feels great. So I've now finished some moderator guidelines that I've been working on for about a year. It occurred to us because we started to try and assemble the case, start trying to pick together the evidence. And the way I wanted to start it really was to start off with the first page with the government statement about cannabis. This government has no intention to legalise cannabis for recreational purposes. Cannabis is a harmful drug that harms the individual, community and society. You know, their usual blah, blah, blah. And it occurred to me that every petition that the government has responded to, they always say the current government, this government or the current government. So it occurred to myself and Claire really yesterday, or the day before, maybe the day before that, I can't remember which day anymore, that we haven't actually had the position of the current cabinet regarding cannabis and their intent with cannabis policy, because every refusal so far has said this government has no intent. So before we go and mount some really mega expensive court case, it occurred to me really we should be checking with them, literally, you know, asking the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, because they are the two that have the authority at the moment under Section 7.1 of Misuse of Drugs Act, I believe it is. So to ask them their position currently and their intended position also. Stating it clearly, basically, I wrote a letter with Claire saying, you know, we, the WTU, we intend to take it to court. We've started taking action. We have a solicitor. But before we take it to court, we'd just like to verify your position and your intended position regarding the war on cannabis. So I have finalised that letter. I was being a bit ever enthusiastic, and I did call it a letter before action, but it's far from a letter before action, so I've no longer called it that. But it's an inquiry of their position, and once we have their position, that can then better inform our position in making our argument against them, unless of course they announce a miracle that they fully intend to change the law. So on that basis, that letter is now with Robert, and I've emailed him asking, is it going to have more clout coming from him acting on our behalf, or being emailed by myself? Once I have that email answered from Robert, we'll get that sent to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. My intent is that Robert will be sending it, and then when we get their response, we can then use that with the barrister to mount our challenge back to it. So that was one of the main things that I've been doing recently. I'm just looking at my screen in the background. Also, I chatted with Robert yesterday. We pretty much have a weekly update nowadays. It's thereabouts every week to 10 days. And he has been in touch with the barrister, or the barrister's assistant, their clerk, and he was in touch with them because he wanted to find out exactly how much was left in the kitty, as he put it, in terms of hours. So how much work exactly does the barrister still owe us, so to speak? Now, I'm guessing this will be by the hour, because that's how they charge. So we will find out how many hours they owe us, which will obviously influence how much information we can put before them, because if we put more information before them and then we've paid them to read, we're going to need to pay them some more money to read it. And at £350 an hour, we need to just try and get the right information for whatever we've got left. The hope and plan being is that we don't need to start any legal fees fundraising again until we've had confirmation from the barrister, positive advice, as Robert puts it, from counsel, that we can move forward with the WTU Declaration of Incompatibility. Interestingly enough, Robert did discuss with me that the EIHA, is it the European Institute of Health, Hemp? I don't remember what the full acronym stands for, but it's the European Hemp Association, I think it is. They are actually trying to mount a challenge against the prohibition of hemp. By hemp, they refer to low THC cannabis, of course. Now, the WTU campaign, although we have included hemp, as it's called, cannabis, in our campaign, the environmental aspects, Robert was basically saying that somebody else is already fighting the hemp environmental benefits fight, so we don't necessarily need to make that so much part of our fight, which it was actually in our campaign. Our fight is crimes against the environment by not letting us use hemp technologies, sustainable green industry technologies that is completely sustainable and actually takes carbon dioxide out of the environment and puts it back in the ground. It is literally a crime against humanity and a crime against the planet that they prohibit cannabis or hemp. So the point being that the WTU really we can keep our focus on the individual and the right for the individual to grow high or low THC cannabis. Robert also clarified, because a member had asked, this particular member, they use cannabis as food. They're treating Crohn's. I won't mention names. Cannabis is their food, which is what I've said for a very long time. Cannabis is food. It's an essential nutrient for the maintenance of homeostasis, a bit like vitamin C and scurvy, or iron and brassica vegetables and chronic fatigue syndrome. So I believe cannabis is food. This other member of our group uses cannabis as food, and she needs to grow a lot of cannabis, and high and low CBD and THC. And they were concerned about whether, like the WTU mission statement, which mentions high and low THC cannabis but doesn't specify anything about CBD, would still cover this. Robert's confirmed to me that our mission statement would cover that, because the legislation currently doesn't stipulate against CBD. Yes, we do have official recognised European strains of industrial hemp, which would generally have lower CBD than the high CBD plants that this particular member was talking about. But Robert believes that if we were successful in what we've set out to do, then it would all be covered. So there's no need for us to actually split into the different cannabinoids. In essence, we have a prohibition of the use of cannabis flower, and we have a THC limit. in essence, and a licensing issue. So in essence, they're mainly the three factors that we are fighting against. There's discriminatory licensing practices. Only wealthy companies can grow for profit, but poor people can't grow for self-sufficiency. So that's the first issue we intend to challenge. And then the other one is there's a THC limit, this 0.2% THC limit. There's no actual scientific justification for this. It's some arbitrary figure picked out of the ethos. So we need to challenge the THC limit. And if we can get rid of that, then we solve that problem. And also the prohibition of flowers. Why on earth in the world can we not use flowers from the cannabis plant? So they, in essence, are the legislative problems. But I don't know, our legal system's too complicated. But that complicated system could be what helps us. So there's a company, I think it's in France. They were making CBD vapes from cannabis flowers. So they were extracting the CBD from the cannabis flowers, which the flowers are prohibited apparently for some stupid reason. So this company, I can't remember their name for definite, so I won't state a name. A company has made a challenge, and it's gone to the European Court of Justice, and they've made a declaration of incompatibility between the prohibition of hemp, and so they're talking low THC cannabis, and that has actually been approved by the European Court of Justice. They have agreed that the prohibition of hemp, or the licensing of hemp, is it's incompatible with human rights law and EU laws to do with the freedom of movement of produce. Because what I buy in Italy, I should be able to buy in France and not be a criminal. That was along the principles. But the point being that this declaration of incompatibility is being used already in the cannabis arena of reform, specifically for industrial cannabis, what they call hemp, or cannabis for industrial purposes. So we are going to try and see what we can use out of that and find a way through the legislation. Also, there's like equality laws. We've got consumer equality laws. We've got disability equality laws. So we are trying to find other areas within legislation that we can actually show the Misuse of Drugs Act is incompatible with all this other legislation. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Human Rights Act, which we know that they try to make difficult anyway. But the fact that Mexico has made it a human right to be able to grow your own cannabis in the development of your own personality, well, I don't see why a Mexican should have more human rights than a British person, or vice versa. We are all humans. Therefore, if it's a human right in Mexico, it should be a human right everywhere in the world. And that is also what we intend to try and assert. We're not making demands as such, we're just trying to assert these things. So once Robert hears back from the barrister and we get some figures of how much time the barrister owes the WTU, we will then move forward more specifically. And also, because the barrister, it seemed from their last correspondence that they had this very narrow medical cannabis focus, that we're wanting to make this broad human rights focus. We are ensuring that the barrister is on the right page, and also asking them to reconsider or ensure that the evidence that they've asked for is still the same evidence they will require. I'm also moving with Robert to try and reach out to expert witnesses. We already have the report from Professor Mike Barnes. Good chap, Chris Bennett, a historian. He's in our group. He may even be watching this. Chris Bennett, a lot of his research, I have chatted with him in the past, and I'm sure many of his research is going to help us prove the historical use of cannabis. We are trying to get in touch with Professor David Nutz, although he's quite an elusive chap and seems to be quite difficult to get in touch with. And there's another expert to do with the spiritual use of cannabis. So we are trying to pull in experts from around the world, basically, to try and help reinforce and support our case when we get to court. So I'll just keep you updated on that. Any suggestions as well, always welcome. And just scrolling down a minute, bear with me a moment. What's going on? Yeah, webinars. Robert suggested quite a couple of weeks ago now that he would like to offer some webinars to the group. I mean, I don't even know what a webinar is, I have to confess. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know what a webinar is, because I haven't got a clue what a webinar is. but I guess it's like a seminar on the web, where he would be happy to discuss any aspects of cannabis law that our community might feel they want to be discussed. I think a good one to start, and I'll suggest this to Rob actually, maybe just to get the ball rolling, would be, what to do when you get that knock on the door, pulled over in the car, stopped in the street, how to deal with that scenario. We have done one of those discussions previously on a live feed in the middle of the NEC arena, so it would be good to actually do a proper webinar on that topic, and then that can be made available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So if you have any areas of cannabis law, or an area that you think should be discussed in the webinar with Rob, please put some suggestions in the comments below, and I will get those over to him and start making webinars. I think the first one to do will be what to do with that knock on the door. If I get that one rolling, that will give us all an idea of what a webinar is, how it will work, and then we can all start trying to think of what areas we might want to be discussed. I have noticed we've got, like I say, we've got quite a spread of people in this group, between individual consumers, people that just are advocates for freedom. We have campaigners, we have compassion providers, we have business people. It would be interesting to try and know the makeup of our group, the percentages that of who makes up what in our group, because we are trying to fight for everyone's rights. So it would be good to know who is in our group, so we know who we're fighting for. One thing that is essential, I've moved my screen, forgive me. So yeah, the webinars we need to get on, and that'd be useful use of Robert's time as well. Robert is also chasing up the bank accounts with his contact, the individual, again I avoid mentioning names, the individual he's put me in touch with is extremely busy. I have sent in various forms, applications, constitutions, things like that, so I'm hoping it's all just in the pipeline. Robert is going to give them a nudge this week as well, so hopefully that'll come together soon, because we still have the cash donations from 3 or 4 events that needs to be banked, and we have the merchandise fund, which is in PayPal, which isn't really a secure place, so we would prefer to have a bank account to manage these things. We have actually paused the merchandise fund at the moment, the merchandise distribution, so we haven't actually been doing anything in that area, which means that the monthly donations that we've been receiving from members, thank you very much to those who have set up monthly donations through our website, they are building up slowly. I think there's about £2,300 now in the merchandise fund, which means when lockdown finishes we could potentially host an AGM for WTU members. That's one thing that's in my mind, but also because the Mackerel Turner Garrett solicitor firm, they're still trying to squeeze £1,167 something out of the WTU community. It does mean that we have the money to pay that if required from the merchandise fund. It wasn't entirely what it was intended for. That is actually the campaign funds that allows us to attend events, produce merchandise, flyers, and pay for everything that needs paying, basically. But rather than making a new fundraiser for more legal fees to pay off that firm, we could use the merchandise fund if required, although I have an issued formal complaint against this final invoice. I've stated my points, which I've covered in the Crowd Justice update quite clearly, and I'm awaiting to hear from the original solicitor firm as to whether they will waiver the final invoice. They kept £2,222 that we'd raised, and then they've asked for another £1,167 on top for pretty much work we don't feel they've done for documents that we've written as a community. So we're challenging, basically, and it could take a long time. This won't actually delay Robert. The information that they're refusing to send back is everything I sent them in the bloody first place, which really, really does piss me off, I won't deny. So they're actually refusing to send back the information that I sent Robert in the first place. The good news about that is, of course, I can just send it all again. More than anything, it's a ball ache and time consuming, but it does mean that nothing can be lost. They can't hold anything back from us at all, really. So at the moment we are just withholding payment upon formal complaint, asking them to evidence the work that they've conducted for WTU, provide evidence for the work conducted, because we are disputing it. So I will keep you updated as that goes. Yes, something that Robert is really keen for us as a community to get organised. It's all very well and good us banging our drums and saying the laws are wrong. He would like us to put together our ideas for the resolution. So, what's the solution to the problem, as it were? Now, that could be how many plants people are allowed to grow, how many grams you're allowed to possess, whether there should be licensing, whether there should be permits, cannabis clubs, all the minutiae, I think the word is, all the little small details, the devil's in the details. We need as a community now to discuss what we would like as our outcome. Robert did use the word realistic and achievable, although I don't know, how do you determine what's realistic and achievable against a corrupt government? So on that basis, I don't know. I bet if we had enough fucking money, anything would be realistic and achievable because they'd just do it. But we haven't. We're sick and dying people, desperate and trying our best to change an unjust law. The 2018 law change to allow the use of cannabis for medical purposes on prescription from a GMC registered specialist has basically left 1.4 million people at least in the risk of criminalisation because they choose cannabis for their health instead of pharmaceutical drugs, but they can't get a prescription from the NHS and they can't afford a private prescription from the private health service. So we now have basically a binary or two-tier system where those who have money, those who have wealth, can pay for cannabis health, and those who haven't got the wealth remain criminals. Now, WTU has always fought for everybody who chooses cannabis for whatever purpose, be that medical, nutritional, creative, spiritual, relaxational, recreational. We don't give a shit why you choose cannabis. You're a human being, you've got an endocannabinoid system, you choose cannabis, you shouldn't be prosecuted. That's pretty much where we go. So we need to have a discussion about the outcomes that we seek. I'm not quite sure how to manage that discussion. Maybe in a separate thread. Maybe I'll start a document. I don't know yet. But we just need to start a thread where we discuss what we want for our outcomes, and then we as a community need to reduce those to what we feel are the most realistic and achievable. I think we should have cannabis, the Misuse of Drugs Act should be repealed, but that might not be achievable, even though that's what I would like. With the law as it stands, it all comes down to licensing, really. It really is just a licensing issue, and they could easily change the Misuse of Drugs Act to allow people to grow at home for their own private use. They could very easily allow that without much hassle in Parliament. The Misuse of Drugs Act currently allows for that. The Home Secretary has the power, and that was how Sajid did it back in 2018. Okay, coming to the end, bear with me. So in the meantime, the most valuable contribution any of our members can do really is to share our group. We now have, I don't exactly know the number actually, 5,719 members we had the last time I looked. I think that may have actually gone up to nearly 5,800 members now. But then we need to consider how many of those members are active within the group. Unfortunately, I know it's not as many as we would like. My laptop won't connect to the computer, so that won't work. So it would be really good to encourage activity of members in the group. If you could share things either from our public Facebook page, The Real WTU, or from our closed group, or from our website, WTUHQ.org, or from our WTU YouTube channel, and Twitter and Instagram. If you can just share any of our articles, blog posts, videos, as far as possible, to raise awareness and hopefully support for the WTU campaign, because the same for every oppressed community in the land. And let's face it, there's been quite a few oppressed communities in the land, and there's an oppressed community in the land now that's currently out in the streets fighting for their rights, fighting for their rights not to be discriminated against for their skin colour, which I thoroughly support, by the way. We've got the same sort of discrimination against us. When I say us, I mean green, people of green, yeah? And that's white people, black people, Asian people. It's people of all nations, all colours, all creeds choose cannabis. And they get persecuted because they choose cannabis. And I don't think that's right. We have the war on drugs, which is based on racism. So long as the war on drugs continues, racism will continue. So, we need to challenge the disproportionate application of drug war laws against ethnic minorities across the world, because they use the excuse of drugs to victimise and persecute people of other ethnicity. So difficult to know what's racist and what's not nowadays. It really is. It's funny, someone actually reviewed in the group the other week Phil Monk's Ignorant and Racist, which I found quite hysterical because, ask my neighbours. I'm sure they'll tell you I'm not racist. So here's a controversial one for you. I don't even know whether to say this because, it's going to cause a wave. Green lives matter too. Green lives matter too, because people of all colours choose green, and people get lives destroyed for choosing green. Killed, put in prison, jobs taken, homes taken, children taken, just because they choose cannabis. And that's what WTU is fighting, that injustice. So if you would like to join the fight against injustice and join the fight for freedom and equality for everyone in the UK, then please come and join WTU, because together we can do it. But alone and broken, it's not going to happen. Right, on that note, I'm going to head off. I've got Claire Sparey waiting to get into my machine again, and we are going to start writing up a bibliography of resources, researchers that set me on my journey, basically set me on fire, and that's why we are here today. This list here, this is my notebook from 2014, by the way, when I first started campaigning. Even here, going at all the articles, human rights articles. You probably can't read that. My writing's fucking terrible. But yeah, here is about 40 different research pages that set me on fire and turned me into the campaigner I am today. My intention is to stick that before the barrister and try and set that barrister on fire with the righteous fury that we all fear. And then hopefully they will come and fight against this injustice too. So on that note, I wish you all good health. Keep smiling, even if you feel shit, because when you smile, you produce an andamide. An andamide is your body's cannabinoid, THC. So keep on smiling and everything will be alright, even if it's not. Right, on that note, love, peace and happiness, folks. Keep in touch and keep sharing. Thank you very much.